Welcome back, Levelin Up Nation! So good to see you guys. I am happy that you have chosen to be here with us today. I've got my good friend Matt Gernetzke on today.
A really great ones, and I've had really crappy ones. And some of the crappy ones, I won't name them, but they've honestly been role models in the other way of what not to do.
Have to have a clear distinction of who has the 51%, who is the actual decision maker. And if you don't have that, if it's actually 50-50, there's always going to be someone that's butting heads.
Going back to the ego side of things, if you're always trying to be the leader, taking on all the praise and, oh, this was me, this was my idea, and I was the reason for all the success, it takes away from
Welcome back, Levelin Up Nation! So good to see you guys. I am happy that you have chosen to be here with us today. I've got my good friend Matt Gernetzke on today, and we have a very special topic. We are always looking to level up our life, our business, our speaking, our communication. And today, as a leader, we want to make sure that you can optimize your leadership. Today, we're talking all about how to optimize your leadership with someone that is a wonderful leader, someone that I absolutely love, I trust. He's someone that he knows exactly what it takes to be a leader as a civilian and in the military. He's got a diverse experience in business and real estate. You're going to absolutely love him. You know him. You've heard him once last year, and this is his second time on the podcast. So grateful to have him here. Matt, how you doing today?
Good. Wow. What a hype up. You bring the energy, bro.
Oh, you know it. You know, we're going to bring the energy. Leaders have to have some energy, right? So let's start here. I know you've got a great background in business, and you're now living in Colorado with me as well, but you're like 4 hours away, which is like a little sad. I'd like to see you more, but so grateful that you're
move on over.
Yeah, I'm gonna move on over. There you go. I want to hear what optimized leadership means to you first, to set the stage so we can understand this concept that you're coming up with. Optimized leadership. Help us wrap our head around that.
Yeah, first off, thanks for having me on. Grateful to be here. And I think, we were talking a little bit about this. I think that the leadership for me, in my experience, has really been more tailored to how I can empower people, how I can create efficiencies in not necessarily my life, but the organization and the people in the organization, and ultimately the people I was in charge of, and optimizing their potential, I think, is the biggest thing to me. Is leadership is about bringing out other people's potential, empowering them to step into their zone of genius or flow or whatever you want to call that, but allowing them to really become who they need to be or who they can be, and not getting dragged down into the weeds and the overall abundant control that a lot of leaders hold to themselves, instead of empowering the right people to take those steps and those actions to take us further and farther than we can go by ourselves.
That was a great summation. I hear efficiency. I hear helping people get in their zone of genius. I would love to hear, who are some of your role models? Who are some of the people that have helped you be able to step into your genius or into that flow like you brought up?
Oof. Top of mind, Dr. Greg Kimball. He's been a huge powerhouse for me.
Be more Greg. He always loves these. He watches them.
Yeah. I'd say there's a military leader. I've had a really great ones, and I've had really crappy ones. And some of the crappy ones, I won't name them, but they've honestly been role models in the other way of what not to do. So I think that there's value in understanding that although they're not role models to what to do, there's an example there of what not to do. But there's a guy named Major Carter, Travis Carter. I just got off a mobilization over the past year, and he was my direct line leader up above, and he did a phenomenal job doing a lot of things. And one of those is filtering the bureaucracy and the craziness that would come down that might be going on, but we never really heard about. So that way we could, going back to optimize, we could optimize our efficiency doing our job, and me being a leader with the team that I had underneath me, because I had 7 people underneath me that we were running a big operation. And so filtering down those the the stuff that's happening above, the stuff that you don't necessarily need to know about, but maybe context. So he did a great job of giving context to what was going on and kind of keeping you in the loop, but not letting it impede on what you needed to do to get done. So I think that's another aspect to optimize leadership, is understanding what information people need to make their own decisions, instead of getting bogged down in the entire organization or the entire framework of everything that's going on, because all different points might cloud judgment or decisions, and they might not actually have the context that the person above them has in full. So
beautiful. That just reminded me of me talking to my wife last night. She's taking karate, and she said sometimes they give us these moves, but we don't know the full context, and I get on the wrong foot. I'm putting my balance on the wrong foot. And it was something that struck me. I learned this when I was in dance. I did a little bit of tap dancing and things. If you don't know the entire move and the entire choreography, sometimes you can be working on a move and you're on the wrong foot the whole time.
Right.
What?
Yeah.
It's the balance of knowing enough of the scope and sequence to be able to do your job right. I loved how you said what information you need to know so they can do their job. So how do you optimize information so that it's not overwhelming and give them just the parts that they need?
Trial and error. Honestly, when I was a company commander, I had a company of about 100 people, and the hard thing I'll say about that, just to give a little bit more context and stuff for this, is I'm a reservist. I'm currently in. I'm just about to transition out, but when we're in, that means basically we get together once a month for a weekend, 2 weeks out of the year. So it's very infrequent time that you get to spend with these people, and they don't get paid for stuff outside of physically showing up. There's ways around that to do that, but it's not like working a job. Whereas, in the military, if people think active duty, you're constantly doing, your job and serving the country and stuff like that. Reservists is different, civilians, and then they're military members, service members on, part-time in the month, which is really part-time because it's 2 days out of the month. But regardless, so not a lot of ability to build cohesive teams in this because you're not physically present. The proximity isn't there. And so there's an added handicap to what you're trying to do, and as a leader, what you're trying to get them to do or realize they need to do to, one, grow themselves, but also achieve whatever the mission is that we need to do. So a lot of what I found out is through my trial and error was I would overshare all this stuff, and I'd see the stagnation and the confusion and the lack of action take place because I overshared something. And so I think for me, what I've kind of done, and I still do this today sometimes, because sometimes I get into a new realm of leadership and I kind of overshare, and then I learn a little bit of, wow, I didn't need to say all of those things. I could have just stuck to this main point, and that could have got the point across. But I think the biggest thing is finding out, the what that's going on, like the reason behind what needs to be accomplished, kind of more so the why, and then either the how, if you know how it's going to happen, or identifying to them what needs to happen, and they need to figure out the how, and giving them a brief context of the backstory. I think that's one other thing to talk about too, is everybody says we need to know the why. We need to know the why. I found in my career that you have to explain enough for them to understand the why behind why, or the reason something needs to get done. But again, going back to oversharing the importance and the why, if you can't get it down to 1 or 2 sentences as to the reason something's very important, then it's probably too much of sharing, because they don't need to know the big picture intricacies. They just need to understand what the big picture is and why it needs to happen.
I feel that. You brought up a really great point. The best leaders, those that optimize for leadership, are those that can take complex concepts and reasons and simplify it to the point that when they give a direction, they are able to give it with such clarity that the people know what they're doing and why they're doing it. They don't need to know how everything fits together. They just need to know this is essential and here's why. Go do it.
Yeah.
That's huge. And that takes a
Yeah.
lot of pressure off you as a leader if you think about it. If you don't have to tell them all the interconnections, you're like, this is why that matters. Go ahead, man.
I think that you brought up something. It is that a lot of times everybody says, well, at least in my view, in the military, they always say everybody's a leader. Everybody's a leader. Everybody, safety first. Everybody's a safety officer, a safety check. Everybody's a leader. And I think that in doing so, one of the downfalls of that is everybody thinks that they're a leader, so therefore they are the decision maker. And so what happens when you give people context like those, like what we're talking about, the why and the how and the what, and you bring them into the fold, there has to be a clear distinction of who the actual decision maker is, the actual leader in that scenario, decision maker. Because what happens is it becomes a committee. We see this in the military all the time. You see this in the corporate world and really everywhere in life. But get a group together and you're explaining what's going on, and everybody gives their 5 cents in. And by that time, you have $1.50 sitting in the circle. It's taken an hour and a half to figure out something that could have just taken 5 minutes. And so that stagnation and the longevity of decision making then goes back to one who's the clear leader, not giving everybody a say in the decision-making side of things, but giving valuable input for the people that you actually need and the subject matter experts that have that knowledge to influence your decision as the leader. But we see that all the time with, especially on the civilian side into the military. Everybody has a civilian life and they come back in, they're leaders, but then there's a military hierarchy and a chain of command that needs to come there. And everybody kind of goes into, if there's not the right culture, it goes into, well, why don't we do it this way? Or why don't we do it this way? It's like, well, because you're in charge, one, and two, because somebody else that has more knowledge than you had a better idea and you might not have full context, whatever it is. But you see that all the time. Everybody goes in committee mode and I have a better idea. We should do it this way. And it causes stagnation and honestly resentment in the organization a lot of times.
Okay, so when you're optimizing for leadership, here's what I'm hearing from you. You have to have a clear distinction of who has the 51%, who is the actual decision maker. And if you don't have that, if it's actually 50-50, there's always going to be someone that's butting heads.
Yeah.
It's that little expression, many chiefs, right? Too many chiefs and not enough Indians. If you have one chief, we know, hey, I'm going to put my input in, but that's the person that makes the decision. That's great.
Yeah.
My wife and I actually banter back and forth all the time like that. We're like, hey, you have the 51% on this, or I have the 51% on this. What was it you were going to say, Matt?
I actually thought about this. So when I was down in two things with this. One, there always has to be a clear person that has the control, the 51%. The 49% or the multiple underneath that don't have the say need to understand that they have the 49%. They don't have the final say. I think two things. One, for the leader, it's important to understand, and you've set that clear boundary that, hey, I have the 51%, and I'm looking for guidance from you or input or whatever to help make the decision in case that I have blind spots that you can help fill. And so if we can find those people that in our leadership team that can fill those blind spots, we go from having a 180-degree view to a panoramic 360. So if you can fill those people on your left and right and behind, and those people that are part of your team that either have the knowledge, the values, those people that align with you, you have a greater viewpoint and vantage point to create that advantage in your decision making, your leadership. And the other thing is for the people that aren't the decision makers, because remember, there's a clear chain of if there's a clear chain of command. Like I'll give you an example. I was just down in on a mobilization for a year for the Army, And we were doing a bunch of things. Within 4 months, I really understood kind of the process and where things were going, thanks to some people around me. And I understood where bottlenecks were happening, linchpins, inefficiencies, and process breakdowns that essentially were happening that were ridiculous. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, I was not the decision maker.
Yeah.
But there's either the decision maker, and if you're not the decision maker, you're the influencer. So me and where I was not the decision maker, but I was able to influence, and it's my job to influence the decision maker in whatever ways that was. For me, it was influencing my higher up, who then had to influence another person, who had to influence another person, who that person then talked to the whole. So it was up, I think, 5 levels there. But
Wow.
Understanding that if you are not the decision maker, you're the influencer. And so I think that's very powerful for people, that just because you aren't making the decision doesn't mean that you can't influence it and make the right change. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if that decision doesn't get, if you don't influence it to make the decision that you want, you have to respect that decision. And that leader goes back to, in the military, you always say you respect rank, not the person. So if you have a crappy leader and they're outrank you, you respect the rank, you salute the rank. But if that person's crappy, obviously you have morals and standards and values that you have to uphold. Maybe you don't really respect the person. Always respect the rank. If you find somebody that respects the rank and the person, that's super ideal, and get close to them, because those ones are fewer and far between than the others around. But
For sure. Well, Matt, this just reminded me of an extremely important concept in Mandarin, this idea of relationships. It's a system of communication, and almost like a link in a chain.
yeah,
If you have these chains of commands and you don't have a good relationship with those people, it's almost like that communication breaks. And there's a breakdown because you aren't connected. You aren't
right.
in a way that allows you to understand why they're saying what they're saying and what you're saying back. Whether that's going up the chain of command or down the chain of command, there's some type of break in that relationship. And that system of the way that you communicate, the way that you lead, if it's not something that is a welcoming environment, you've probably seen this in the military, would be my guess. Sometimes people have a lot of suggestions and they could make a deep impact and positive influence on something, but because the environment isn't safe, they stay quiet. They shush.
Yeah.
They basically become that snow leopard where they just are hunkering, being their own, and just biding their time. What's an experience that you've been able to see where the environment was toxic, and because of that, the leadership was not optimized?
Which example do I choose? I'll say this. Very recently, there was a unit coming in to replace our unit, and there was one specific person that was basically number 2 in charge, and that person had a very toxic attitude, very aggressive, always making excuses, always finding blame elsewhere besides themselves. Because as leaders, we need to take responsibility for everything and anything that happens. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, it's our job and role as leaders to take that responsibility, good or bad. And in the bad, you really own up to it. In the good, you really need to praise and push to the people that actually did it. Because a lot of times as leaders, we aren't the doers doing things. We have the ideas, but the people that execute them and take care of them are actually not ourselves. And so making sure that you don't come into the absorbing all the praise for yourself instead of pushing it to the right people. So there's been multiple times in my career that, I've had something happen and I always push it back to, like, for example, we were doing a crew surf weapon gun qualification, and we crushed everybody, all of our teams crushed. We had top team, but I didn't go back to like taking praise for myself, even though I was the one getting it because I was the representation. I always went back to the people that actually trained them and the leaders that shaped them, because that wasn't me. I helped set the culture, the standard, and the vision of kind of what we needed to accomplish. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I wasn't the one that did that. So pushing that to the people that deserve it instead of taking it all for yourselves, because that just builds your ego, and that ego gets in the way of so much. But going back to the toxic culture, the second in command, the first in command wasn't very strong. He wasn't bad, but the second in command really set the tone because he started blaming everybody. Everybody looked up to him as a representation of the leader, because he was the second in command, and that toxicity trickled down, and the entire unit was, one, less efficient, two, didn't feel open to share things, ideas were stagnated. You just saw a total decrease in efficiency and optimization for people in general. And honestly, the workplace environment was not ideal, and people weren't happy to go to work. So I have a bunch of scenarios I want to talk to them about, so I'm using an outside example. But it's very evident the culture that is set and how that impacts the efficiency, the productivity, what we can accomplish as a team if the culture is not optimized.
I think optimizing culture and setting an environment where people feel safe, they feel heard, where that chain of connection is going up and back. One of the things you brought up that was so beautiful, this is something I learned as a missionary almost, my first few months that I was in Taiwan. It was this idea of nali. Anyone that gives you a compliment, or they say, wow, you're doing X, Y, or Z really well. You say, where? And you point to who it was that actually deserves the credit. I think that's beautiful. And it's a huge value in the way that you do things. So, 1 second. I actually have a quick question for you. When you think about leadership, I would love a story that hits home for those of us that are speakers, and how sometimes we don't get to have the title, but we still are leaders. How have we been able to do that?
You want a story?
Yeah, I want to hear a story. Tell me a story about, when you've been a leader without a title, basically.
I actually think this kind of goes into something else, but I think it hits kind of two things. So I first started, when I first started in the Army, I'm an officer, so you go through some type of officer training that's not basic training, but it's a type that everybody knows. Everybody knows basic, but so I'm going through, I'm a cadet, we're going to the summer camp. And so cadets, going back to everybody's a leader, you have 40 people in this platoon that are all leaders, and they rotate you into different leadership positions. And so you have 40 leaders, and there's actually like 7 actual leaders at playing the roles at different times. So you can obviously imagine there's 740 that doesn't equal out. And so a lot of times what would happen, and this was like my second year, we actually got evaluated, so we got graded, and that helped figure out where we were going to go in our military career and stuff. So it was a big deal. A lot of people always were trying to lead, influence, make the decision, even though they weren't in that role. And so one of the things that I got a compliment and actually set an anchor into my life and my leadership style throughout the course of the last 10 plus years since that experience. I got ranked I got ranked 3 out of 40. The top 2 people above me were prior service. They were non-commissioned officers, had 6, 7, 8 years. One of them was a ranger, so it was a highly decorated and competent person. But one of the reasons why I got ranked 3 out of 40 was because I understood the difference between I was a leader and I was a follower. I was the subordinate. I was the person helping achieve the mission instead of being the one in charge at that moment. And so going back to leader without a title, I had no title. I literally was just a person. I played the part. Half the time when they made decisions, I was like, wow, this is a wrong one. I would try to bring up something maybe for them to kind of maybe a vantage point. Most of the time they said no, and then I just let it be because it wasn't my role to influence that. And they also needed to learn too. And so I think that just goes back to one, there's the leader, but there's also a follower, and there's a beauty and a cohesion that needs to happen there within the chain of command or the organizational structure in a business. But two, there's ways to lead without having the title. Part of the way I lead is influencing, but then also the other way is going back to the ego side of things. If you're always trying to be the leader, taking on all the praise and, oh, this was me, this was my idea, and I was the reason for all the success, it takes away from the other people and growing the other people, which ultimately, if you grow the people around you and you empower them, that's going to supercharge your business environment, structure, what you can do in the world as a team. And I think that that's one of the most powerful things. The way I look at leadership is empowering the people around me to reach their full potential. Optimized leadership for me comes basically down to that. Is if I'm a leader, I'm optimizing the people around me. I'm not necessarily doing it. Like I had a good idea for our last event that I came up with, and I had somebody else deliver it because I knew that their delivery would have been is going to be more powerful for them to deliver it the concept that I had versus the way I would have delivered it, because they're a little bit farther along on the leadership side or the speaking side of the journey, and they could deliver it better. So I knew that I could take that, empower them to do that, and it would be better to serve the people that we were trying to serve versus holding it in to myself, delivering it, and it not hitting the right way that it needs to hit.
Excellent. So what I'm hearing from this, because you brought up a couple of really good golden nuggets, was if you want to be a leader without a title, you run to the gap that needs you. You run to the space that needs your help, and you basically lift where you stand. There was this example years ago that I heard from, I think his name was Mr. Uchtdorf, right? And he talked about they needed to lift this grand piano, and they had all these young men, and they said, I just need you to lift where you stand. All 8 or 9 of these guys got around, and this was like extremely heavy piano. All of them picked it up, and they were able to take it from the front of the church and bring it down off of the stand. And you're like, that would have cost thousands of dollars to move that thing, but they were able to together lift where they stood. If any one of them weren't doing their job, they weren't supporting, they weren't being directed, then it wouldn't have happened, but they lifted where they stood. Every single one of us have an opportunity to do that. What are some of the stories that come to mind for you as far as being able to lead without recognition? Sometimes we, as leaders, we do things and we don't let others know about it. What are ways that you've been able to let the thing happen that needed to happen and you didn't have to take credit for it, or you gave that credit to somebody else? I'd love to hear an example.
I'm going to circle back to something. If you can just remind me, well, okay, I'll remember it. So going back to that, I think that the ways that I've been able to do it is one-on-one conversations and pull people aside to help them work through a plan of action or course of action that they want to take, and helping them understand what the best way could be, not giving it to them. Because again, we're trying to help. Our job is to empower people to grow and reach their full potential. We can't give them all the keys to the castle. We need them to be able to develop and do that on their own, but we can be the guide. We can be that compass on their map, helping them navigate, to not go into the swamp if they don't need to. Maybe they stay out on the road instead of going through a swamp. One of the other things that has been big for me is creating an environment. So like, not letting people fail, but letting people fail. What I mean by that is when somebody goes through and they're in charge of something, sometimes they overlook something, they don't plan for something. Maybe it's just they don't have the knowledge for it. They're, being maybe a little bit of negligence, whatever it is. If you have a team behind you and a mission that needs to get accomplished, there's value in letting somebody fail, but not letting the overall mission fail. And so one of the things that my team, when I was in command, we would always do is we would create a, whatever mission was, whoever's in charge of it, they would be in charge of that, but we'd always identify stop gaps where if they go too far this way and it's going to the mission's going to fail, we could kind of have backup plans to make sure that things still succeed, but still allow that learning environment and that opportunity for them to grow and make those mistakes, because that's how we're going to grow the fastest, is making those mistakes, making the impact on our brain of that failure side of things. So allowing that environment to play out, but still allowing the mission or whatever needs to get accomplished to come through. Because a lot of people look at, man, we just need to do it perfect. Like if I have the knowledge, we're just going to do it, and it's going to get done. But there's no room for growth in the culture, in the environment, in the organization, without the systematic approach to letting the other person lead. So that's one of the ways that, and kind of give you another side thing, because I think this is super important. I've gone through so many times in organizations, and I know everybody has an example of this. In an organization, or think of an example where you had a high achiever that was almost like the do-it-all person. For me, I had 5 soldiers, and one of them was basically the do-it-all. They were in the logistics side of things. They were in the operations. They were doing the admin stuff. They were in all of it. And their job was actually operations. And so it was a crutch. It was a blessing because I had underperformers. And so she kind of held up the organization and helped things be efficient and helped us. But come time, she left. And I was racing to figure out how to take all of the knowledge that she had, because she was transferring to another unit, and dump it into the organization I had currently, which set me up for failure because I just let the status quo keep going. And eventually when she left, I had like an underperforming organization because nobody had been stuck to the standard of doing their own job. And so I think that there's a standard there that needs to be set in an organization, that if you do have somebody that's a doer and kind of does everything, you need to watch out for that person. One, they're incredible and they're hardworking. They can get burnout. But 2, it's a disservice to your other elements of your organization, the other positions, you as a leader, honestly, to not make sure that they stay in their own lane and can work harder other ways to improve their lane, but keep the other people trained up and ready and functioning on their own. Because once that person leaves, if they ever do, a lot of times it's like, for me, I knew about it months in advance that it was coming. But if you just have an employee quit or just out of the blue, your business is literally left stuck with you trying to pick up the pieces on something that you probably shouldn't be doing. It should be done by somebody else. So I think there's a powerful piece there to talk about that. Although you might have a really high achiever and they might do a lot of stuff that typically you wouldn't have them do, but they're really good at it, that's taking away from the other people in the organization that may or may not be needing to do those things. And it's a dissatisfaction and de-optimization once that happens, that they leave. Because a lot of times we don't see the writing on the wall, and then we're like going through a bunch of pain that we could have avoided by just keeping guardrails up into where people need to be and how they need to operate.
Matt, this just is pinging so true to me for how I deal with my kids sometimes. All of you parents out there, this is going to feel so real. Just for a moment, story time. I remember earlier this year, we're going to help our kids figure out how to do the dishes. This is your role. You figure out the dishes, you get it done. And man, it takes so much patience to have them do a project that you could have done in 10 minutes that takes 30. You're like, they need to learn. They can do it. And you've got the one baby standing on the on the dishes, and then you have the other ones like super slowly taking their time, wiping it. You're like, just rinse the dish. It's fine. And put it in there. Sometimes we have to give them those experiences of
Mm-hmm.
failure that is safe. You said have those fail safes, and you said the stop gaps, right? So you can make sure that you don't have those like major failures, but you give
Yeah.
them the opportunity to fail in that safe zone. Like there's very little that they're going to have happen that they're going to get hurt doing dishes. I'd wash the knives, everything else I let them wash. You're like, okay, what's the worst that can happen? Not much.
Yeah.
So one of the other things I'd love to touch on before we end up in the next few minutes was at the top of our call, you said, I wanted to talk about this huge difference between a leader and a follower. I feel like we hit that. I also feel like leading from the front was brought up pretty well. There's this concept of the spear and holding the spear that we were talking about right before this call. I was like, this is so good. Let's hit that. When you are in a situation where you're playing someone's wingman, you're playing the backup, right? The spear tip rather than the person holding the spear. What does that look like when you're optimizing for service and optimizing for following? Because that's one of the ways you optimize for leadership is you have the right followers and you say, you're the decision maker and you just go and do it. So let's talk about this spear principle. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'd say that we kind of touched on it. You know, there's a leader and there's a follower, and sometimes those roles change out, and you can get thrown in a leader. But ultimately, I think that there's some truth in everybody as a leader, depending on where you fall. Like, for example, you know, if you're the top, you know, the person in charge, you're going to have a second, and then they're going to be the leader for anybody under them. There's a consistent chain there, which we've kind of talked about. But I think that there's benefits in understanding the role, not trying to steamroll and take that 51% from the actual leader, because that just distracts the leader from actually what they need to be doing, because they're focused on whatever the solution is or getting whatever they need to accomplish. Your job as the follower is to, one, support them and any ammunition and be their eyes, their ears, and their data feed in the, you know, their Ethernet cable, their upload to the data that they have to make the best decision. And so going back to the influencing side of things, the influencing can be a variety of different things. It could be, you know, from gestalt of experience where you've had this experience before and you bring up, hey, we tried this last time, it didn't work. You know, Benjamin Franklin was huge on looking at reflecting on his past daily, whatever occurred, so he didn't make the same decision again. So as a subordinate or follower or somebody underneath the leader making a decision, it's our job to also help make the decision in the fact that they don't make the same mistake you've already made, unless they're unopen to it. Obviously, that's a different topic. But the tip of the spear really goes back to, like, if you're number two, feeding the ammo and figuring out one, actually, man, I see going back. Okay, so the number one is going to have some type of vision, whether it's small or big, depending on what level they're at in the spectrum of what's looking to be accomplished, but they're going to have a vision. That's part of the leader's job, is to develop the vision and then empower people to get the vision done and not just do it by yourself. Because again, we go farther faster as a team instead of by ourselves. And if we feed that ammo to them so that they can get the best thing accomplished, there's more. Yeah, we go farther faster. A lot of my train of thought there, but I think there's power in I know there's power in the fact that we can be the tip of the spear, feed the tip of the spear with the ammo, but also at the end of the day, that leader's going to turn back around and ask you to go lead. It's inevitable. They're going to have to go do another mission. They're going to have to go do something else that takes their mind off something. And you being that person underneath them and being that one little follower, supporting them, having their back, being their eyes on the back of their head, having the best intent in mind and the best intention of what you want to see accomplished within their vision, they're going to turn around and say, hey, I need to go get something else done. I need you to take care of this. And so you're going to take that tip of the spear then and you're going to have that 51%, and you're going to have to do the exact same thing with whoever you have underneath you. If you don't have anybody else underneath you, then you probably need to find some other people to be underneath you, because you, one, aren't as efficient, and you need to scale or grow or whatever it is to get there. But we have to have a team around us. Maybe it's a mastermind or something like that, where it's a team of other people around you to help close those gaps and those blind sides or blind spots, so we don't have them anymore. But you have to have some type of cohesive team around you, because Greg Kimball always says, the fastest way to go to take yourself to the next level is go from a me to a we. We have to take the me to a we. So that's leadership in a nutshell, I think, as well as providing the opportunity, empowering the people, optimizing their potential and their energy to a specific vision and goal, so they can step into who they need to be and create the we around us, so we can all grow together and get farther faster. So yeah,
I love it.
Data.
When I hear you talking about feeding the ammo, and you have that beautiful vision of someone that is pointing the gun, they're the one that is in charge of that situation, but you're feeding the ammo. If you don't do your job, their job can't be done efficiently. Just like holding that spear, they point it. If it doesn't have a spearhead, it's not actually going to make much damage.
Well, if you think about it too,
body guy, right?
This actually brought something else up. In war, military, whatever you want to say, the biggest thing that kills armies is the logistics side of things. If you're not getting the logistics, the ammo, the food, the water up to the people on the front line, the tip of the spear, they're ineffective. They're not optimized. They're not. So you, as the second in command, or wherever you fall in the order, we have to have the tip of the spear in mind, but we are almost more vitally important than they are, because we're feeding the data and the analytics, the equipment, that whatever we need to get the mission done, the desired end result, we have to feed that to them. If they don't have that data, that trust, and trust is another way of providing that ammo for them. If they have that trust, back and forth, you have a much powerful team. And so if you're not providing that forward, they can't do their job as efficiently. And they might be in hand-to-hand combat with somebody that has a gun, and obviously we know how that probably goes. So we need to equip the leader. It's our job to equip the leader, just like the leader's trying to equip us. It's a two-way street.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to end this. I think that you brought some great ideas about not just being a leader, but being a follower and owning your role. That's a huge portion of being efficient as a leader and as an organization, and knowing when you have which role, because sometimes you're that handle of the spear, and sometimes you are the spearhead to make sure that the information gets delivered. Thank you so much for being on today. Thank you for sharing your insights, your inspiration. Any final thoughts, or is there any question that I didn't ask you that you're like, man, I wish you would have brought this up because I've got a story? What is that one final thought or one bit of encouragement that you're like, oh, this needs to happen? I want to serve. Go ahead.
I think that's just kind of an overarching theme. They kind of go hand in hand, but most people in life look at things as a transaction versus a transformation. This is something that's weighed deeply on my mind over the past, really probably year, but really the last 3 months. But a lot of people as a leader, we go for the transaction, we go for the praise. Our ego gets in the way. We just want to accomplish the mission. We don't want to grow people. We don't want to help people reach their full potential. But we get in that leadership position, in that spot where we're the final say. We have a lot of power, and you can abuse that. And so there's a balance of making sure that you're actually serving the people and understanding what needs to get accomplished to serve the person, instead of just going for, and the business side of things, car sales is an easy example. If you're just trying to sell a car, and it's a family, they have 3 kids, and you're trying to sell them a Porsche, a 2-seater, that isn't serving them. They don't have another vehicle. They just have a 2-seater you're trying to sell them. That's not actually serving them. The right thing to do is to understand where they're coming from, what they need, and then fit their needs with what they, fit the car with what their needs actually say. And so there's a different approach to leadership with that too, is understanding the transformational side of how can we transform not only the organization, but the lives and the people around us in our organization and our partners, strategic partners, vendors, and influencing the entire ecosystem of how we conduct ourselves and interact with the world, but really focusing on the way that we show up to serve. But to be able to serve, you have to understand who the other person is. Businesses, the other leader, maybe it's the other team, whoever it is, you have to understand them and get, access to their thought pattern. So that way you can then figure out which service is the top priority versus something that's not. So I think that's something to keep in mind when you're both leading and following, and probably just in life in general, is identifying, am I in a state of looking for the transaction and just the money, the desperation, just to make some money or get something across that maybe my ego's driving, or is it something that's actually going to serve at a higher level for the good of the group, which ultimately benefits myself as a leader as well.
Excellent. That's a wonderful point to put a little bow at the end of our conversation. Matt, love you, man. Thank you so much. Guys, if you want more Matt, you want more me, go to the Final Percent. And man, we are just absolutely loving leading that group. It is such a pleasure to see you coming out of your shell, being able to experience what it's like as a civilian. I know you've done this in the military side, but as a civilian to go and really serve at the highest level. So thank you so much for all that you do. Love you, brother. Love you more. I got you.
Yeah, but I appreciate the opportunity. Appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. Well, it was a pleasure. Guys, if you are struggling with stage fright, remember stage fright costs and why you must fix it. I've got that book, 3 Reasons that you can overcome your fear to talk with people. And as you start to be a leader, you will need to be able to speak in all these different areas on different stages in front of people. And it is something that doesn't go away. As you improve yourself, you start to have more opportunities to help others improve themselves. So I would love to have that conversation with you guys. Continue to level up your life and do all that you can today to be the very best version of yourself. And we'll see you next time. God bless.